For more, CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins me now from Philadelphia. And Robert and I have a pact. We try not to overthink these things. So, Robert, we know the GOP Senate race was close. What does that tell us? Question one. Two, what are the odds, the probabilities of a recount?
Major, so good to be with you. The Pennsylvania Senate Republican primary was not an ideological battle. It's evident that Dr. Mehmet Oz and David McCormick, the two top contenders heading toward a likely recount here in Pennsylvania, they both embraced the Trump agenda. The question is, would voters follow the Trump endorsement or not? And McCormick was able to make inroads in the final days with traditional Republican voters, touting his military service, his business experience. So we still see a Republican Party very much in the image of former President Trump when it comes to policy, when it comes to politics. But Trump's not dictating each slate of nominees in every race.
And I think there's sometimes a tendency, Robert, for us in the media to gauge the Trump endorsement. But as the Philadelphia Inquirer wrote today, Trumpism still won yesterday in Pennsylvania, whether or not Mehmet Oz with the Trump endorsement prevails or not. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
It's a fair assessment, Major, not only in Pennsylvania but across the country. Did Madison Cawthorn lose his primary in North Carolina, that first-term congressman, because he had the Trump endorsement? Of course not. The Trump endorsement helped Cawthorn, if anything, in a primary race in North Carolina. Does Cawthorn losing mean Trumpism is dead or waning in North Carolina? It certainly doesn't mean that. I agree with you. You don't want to read too much into a race in North Carolina or in Pennsylvania. Dr. Oz had a lot of factors weighing against him. Voters we encountered here in Pennsylvania over the past week were wondering, is he a true conservative? Will he be a real voice for the Trump coalition? He had to convince people he was a Pennsylvanian, he was a Trump supporter. All of that was weighing on voters' minds, as well as the Trump endorsement, not only the Trump endorsement on their minds.
The Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate, John Fetterman, he won big. What does that mean for the general election in a race that both parties consider vital to a majority building process on either side this fall?
Well, it probably means we're going to be coming back to Pennsylvania quite a bit in the next few months ahead of the November elections, because Fetterman makes this a real race. This is a 6'8" lieutenant governor who's now the Senate nominee for Democrats. He likes to wear a hoodie on the campaign trail. He sometimes wears gym shorts to campaign in political events. He's someone who has made a populist appeal to Trump voters in Pennsylvania, but he's also tried to make an appeal to Bernie Sanders progressives in Pennsylvania, talking about issues like a $15 minimum wage. So if anyone could win against the Trump coalition in Pennsylvania, you would guess at this point it could be Fetterman. We'll have to see if he's facing off against Dr. Oz or David McCormick.
Commonwealth of Pennsylvania also has a governor's race. It will pit Republican Doug Mastriano versus Democrat Josh Shapiro. One of the issues in that race, not just for Pennsylvania, but for the country, will be so-called election integrity, which means different things to different people on the political spectrums. Mastriano has said, and took an active role in January 6th, that the election in 2020 was somehow fraudulent, though he doesn't explain how. What does that mean in Pennsylvania and nationally should Mastriano prevail?
This is significant. You have State Senator Doug Mastriano, who attended the Stop the Steal rally in Washington on January 6th, who worked to overturn President Biden's 2020 victory. He is now the gubernatorial nominee in Pennsylvania. And he's not just a hardcore Trump supporter. This is someone who takes a hard line in terms of press access. CBS News tried to attend a Mastriano event over the weekend. He blocked press from even entering the premises. He is rarely allowed even local reporters to cover his events in Pennsylvania. He still faces an uphill challenge. His rival now is Attorney General Josh Shapiro, a pretty popular Democrat in Pennsylvania who won the Democrats' gubernatorial nomination. Shapiro has about $15 million in his war chest. Mastriano has less than $1 million. And so it's going to be interesting to see, can Mastriano build a statewide campaign that reaches not just into the Trump base in Pennsylvania, but into the collar counties around Philadelphia and the suburbs of Pittsburgh.
Robert, you mentioned war chests, and whether the audience likes it or not, war chests matter. And I think you looked, and I did, for maybe some sifting clues in the Republican Governors Association statement after Mastriano's victory. It sounded to me, read to me, tepid, and there was no affirmative declaration that the RGA a fundraising process on its own would go all in on the Mastriano race. Did you detect that?
Oh, it's clear when you read the RGA statement that they're not sitting there in their office in Washington applauding and toasting the Mastriano victory in Pennsylvania. Because when you talk to people close to the RGA, people close to the NRSC, the Senate campaign arm, they're looking at this map in 2022, whether it's for governor, for senator, for House, and they see an opportunity for Republicans to make significant gains, running against President Biden's record on the economy, talking about inflation, trying to pin it all on Democrats. The last thing most national Republicans want to be talking about in this campaign season is the 2020 election, making false claims about it being stolen or rigged. And that appears to be Mastriano's pitch most days here in Pennsylvania. That's not what Republicans on the national front seem to be wanting to talk about. But again and again, those national Republicans are finding out the base wants something. Former President Trump wants something. And just because you don't like that refrain doesn't mean it's going away in any sense.
Robert, with your indulgence, I want to drill down just a little bit deeper in the implications of a Mastriano potential victory in Pennsylvania if he were to become governor. Pennsylvania is a unique state. The governor appoints the Secretary of State, and he has made clear that he would appoint someone who shares his view about the 2020 election. And if the governor is appointing someone who is an election denier from 2020, the implications for 2024 and Pennsylvania's electoral votes loom very large. Walk us through that.
Major, it's an important point you just made because this country crept toward a possible constitutional crisis in January 2021. Imagine if Vice President Pence had walked away from the lectern in Congress and said he did not believe President Biden had won. You already had President Trump saying Biden had not won in his view. You would have had two major American figures in the White House saying they're not going to endorse Biden as the winner, or at least respect that outcome. And if the election had been thrown back to the states or in the House of Representatives in 2020, who knows how that really would have played out in a contingent election. Fast forward to January 2025. Imagine if the election comes down to Pennsylvania and you have Governor Doug Mastriano sitting there in Harrisburg, that beautiful state capital with the green dome, and he says, if the Democrat wins Pennsylvania, I'm just not going to support it. I'm able to control the Secretary of State apparatus to a certain point here in Pennsylvania, and we're going to have special sessions. We're not going to send our vote to Washington in any way to be counted as part of the Electoral College. That is a crisis on the horizon, and no one in Washington, Democrat or Republican, seems to have a really clear answer about how that would play out and what it would mean for the fabric of American democracy.
Robert, you grew up in Pennsylvania, suburban Philadelphia. I want to get your perspective on what was apparent yesterday. Large turnout on both sides, but on the Republican side, there was a more rural component to turnout on both the governor's race and the Senate race. And some observers have already said this is consistent with the ruralization of the Republican Party. Do you see that in your home state of Pennsylvania?
You do see it. We went up to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is kind of a central Pennsylvania, a little bit central eastern part of the state, and certainly a rural area of Pennsylvania. And what you encounter when you stop at different restaurants, campaign events, is so many voters, whether it's on the Democratic side or the Republican side, who are coming out of the woodwork. People who may not have been participating in election after election have been stirred in part by Fetterman, but also really stirred by that Trump coalition. They are coming out and voting in new ways. And in Pennsylvania, think about Pennsylvania. This is a state that has elected someone like Tom Ridge, who supports abortion rights, as a Republican governor. It is a state that also elected Rick Santorum, its senator, but it's a state that had Ed Rendell, a pretty moderate Democrat, as governor, Tom Ridge, a moderate Republican, as governor, Pat Toomey, who supports gun control efforts in the Senate on the Republican side. Now it's, at least in the gubernatorial race, elevating Doug Mastriano, an election denier. It shows you not necessarily a rightward drift of Pennsylvania, but a rightward drift of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania.
Robert Costa, as always, thanks so very much.
Thank you.